Benvenuti a Toronto. Benvenuti a parlare di Oltrepo
Welcome to
Pavese.
those in Milan and welcome to those in Toronto. Welcome to this
Appunto, grazie
event about the Oltrepo Pavese. I would like to warmly thank you for being here because the Oltrepo Pavese is not so extremely famous like Bolgheri and many other places around Italy. The Oltrepo Pavese, nevertheless, is a very interesting area that produces a variety of different wines, and tonight I'll help you taste the wines that we make in the area, hoping that will be the ideal representatives of our area.
A far andare anche le slide, se possibile. Eccolo qua, prima domanda. Che cos'è l'Oltrepo?
Next question, what is the Oltrepo Pavese? As I told you, I was telling you, most people don't know where the Oltrepo Pavese is even, so they don't know where to situate it. Okay, this is not working well.
È questo pezzettino di Lombardia.
Well, the Oltrepo Pavese is this bit of Lombardy. I think you know, maybe you don't.
Nel nord dell'Italia.
Lombardy is in northern Italy. Up here there are the Alps, and here the Apennine range. The Oltrepo Pavese is this extreme tip because and it's called like this because it's beyond the Po River, and it's very few areas of Lombardy below the Po River, south of the Po River, and it's in an area that stretches from the Po Valley all the way to the Apennines, where it reaches elevations of 1,700 meters above sea level. So although the Po Valley, this is a hilly area that reaches higher elevations. To the north you have the River Po and then the hills. The hills have initial elevations of between 250 and 300 meters above sea level, and then progressively grow with a succession of waves that are higher and higher as you move south. But the DOC wine production area of the Oltrepo Pavese is somewhat smaller.
Me la mandi tu?
Okay.
La zona in cui si produce
So this is the area where wine is made.
La prima, la seconda e la terza
The first and second, third were hills. So from the Po Valley up to approximately 500 600 meters above sea level.
Produzioni differenti in questo
The productions in this area are all different because we have different soils, different elevations, so that allows us to play around with many different varietals. It's also very interesting to think of the geological layers that below the Oltrepo Pavese. These are the Apennines of Italy. The Po Valley is an alluvial plain, and the entire first wave, the first range of hills, was created by the flood of the Po Valley. If you see the map of Italy above, you'll see this crescent where the tip in Stradella, which is the northernmost tip of the Apennines, follows this huge crescent via Piedmont, etc. And it's all made of gravel. And then, finally, since the Alps emerged and the Alps that are the backbone of Liguria, different plains were created that have cut through this entire area east to west. So we have different ranges, different soils, different elevations, which makes it possible for us to produce many different styles and types of wine. as well as our climate and a landscape that is really interesting and I would say beautiful. Here is where you see our biodiversity, steep hills that have very steep slopes. And here, the vineyards have already been tended. In the Oltrepo Pavese, there were vineyards in the days of the Romans. Strabo, the Greek historian, describes this as an area of large casks, good wines, and nice people. Hopefully that is true as well. This area makes it possible to cultivate many different varietals. Here we have noted down the most important, the ones that are really prevalent, which cover both our indigenous grapes, such as Croatina, which is well prevalent, well distributed across this area, or Barbera, that is something that is in common with Piemonte. Our hills will extend side towards Tortona and the Tortona hills, and on the other side towards Piacenza and the hills of Piacenza. This is an area that is very well suited for planting Moscato, and here in the at the higher elevations you have Riesling and Pinot Nero, especially the Pinot Nero for making Spumante, and it's not by chance that we start from Pinot Noir or Pinot Nero. Pinot Nero is one of the most representative grapes in the world's enology. It reached the Oltrepo Pavese, brought about by Count and they imported, and others who imported it from France, who tried to plant it in the Oltrepo for making wines. In the Oltrepo, this grape variety found an excellent soil that was suitable to produce both red wines and Metodo Classico bottle fermented wines. In my small production, we mostly, in my small winery, we produce mostly white wine made from Pinot Nero. The first wine is a bit special. It's a semi-sparkling white wine from Pinot Nero grapes. From an enological perspective, maybe you are already thinking of a murderous practice because using Pinot Nero to make an easy-to-drink, fresh wine that is slightly effervescent might sound like sacrilege. Now, this is a very nice flow chart, and I would like to thank Quattro Calici because they provide lots of the same. So you have the harvest, the pressing, and the fermentation, and every part of how you make a Metodo Classico. But the most important to make a good quality Metodo Classicos is, is the press. It is at the press level that what part that a decision is made on what part of the grapes will be used to produce what wine. We keep saying that you press grapes in this press, which inside has a big, like a big ball that will inflate with compressed air. And we try to put the grapes as whole as possible in this press, and this bladder, as it's called, will press on the bunches and the berries in order to extract the juice, now to destroy, breaking, or crush the grapes. So in this way, you prevent any loss of color you prevent loss of tannin, the loss of tannin, and you can obtain the free-run juice. So, as we were saying, we're all peasants. My family has been in farming for decades, and farmers are not accustomed to wasting anything. So we're not gonna throw away the second juice, that is the second press juice. The second press juice, there are still beautiful products, are those that will start with the best bouquet and fragrances because they're fuller, more straightforward and more persistent. But they will be lost quickly because they are much more subject to oxidation. So historically, in our area, we've always used the second press juice to produce this one. A Pinot Nero, as a white wine, but lively, semi-sparkling, and it's made again from the second pressing. This is called Il Cavaliere because it's devoted to my grandfather. It's dedicated to my grandfather, Cavalier Giuseppe Fiamberti, Cavaliere being a title. It's 100% Pinot Nero. You can immediately detect the freshness and immediate enjoyability of this wine, the fruit. To the palate, it is immediately with a very nice acidity that calls for the next sip, with moderate roundness that makes it suitable for pairings with many dishes of our tradition, especially fish and vegetables in our area. It's often drunk as an aperitif. But the interesting part is that it will remain fresh and enjoyable for long. I would like to dwell for a second on apples. In the entire Oltrepò Pavese area, people have always made semi-sparkling wine. They're an integral part of our tradition, as well as of the entire Po Valley, from the Freisa Piedmont to our Bonarda, and then you have a good Turnio near Piacenza, and then the Fortane of Parma, and then you have Lambrusco, and you used to have Prosecco made in the traditional way of the past. So the entire Po Valley has always produced semi-sparkling wine. Why? Because it's the area, it's the history of the area and cuisine. So the dishes and the sparkling wines were co-engineered. The Po Valley is a place where swines are farmed, are raised to make cold cuts. And when you have pork, fizzy wines have always worked wonderfully. Also, we were along the line of the so-called temperature change, while more. Allow me to say this. Alcoholic fermentation works well between 18 and 23 degrees. It can be slightly higher or slightly lower, but below 50 degrees, our alcoholic yeasts will stop working and they will not be able to continue to maintain the fermentation. So in the south, people would harvest the grapes somewhat earlier in the season, so the fermentation would start while it was still warm, and almost always you'd reach the end of the fermentation, while more to the north, like in Valtellina, people would light fires below the tanks because the harvest would happen later, and to the fermentation, extra warmth was needed. In our part of Italy, The grapes would be picked when it was still warm. Then towards the end of the fermentation, the weather would turn to very cool. So the very last grams of sugar were not fully fermented. Our ancestors would taste the wine, listen to the wine to see and hear if it was sweet, and if it was still fizzy. There were still bubbles in the fermentation, so it wasn't a very accurate system, and generally filtration would happen in bags, in jute sleeves. Very often it was common to bottle wine with some residual sugar and alcoholic yeasts in the bottles. The yeasts would stand still during the winter and start fermentation in the spring, so the wine would start fermenting again, and that was a typical wine from our part of the country. So we discussed our second pressings, but let's now talk about the free-run juice. The Oltrepò Pavese has been a DOCG ever since 2017. The first Metodo Classico in the Oltrepò was made in 1960, the first Metodo Classico ever made in Italy. Obviously, the rule books have changed in the meanwhile, the legislation did too, and also the names associated to the wines and their definitions have changed. Nowadays, the grapes admitted are Pinot Nero, minimum 17%, and then Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, and also Pinot Meunier in the latest version. And Pinot Meunier to a reasonable proportion. The minimum aging is 12 months, 24 vintage wines. But since we are processing black grapes, we like to keep it on the yeast, on the lees as much as possible. The Pinot Noir, that is, the fermentation is stopped, and it is bottled and disgorged and everything. Only 18 months is opening a bottle like that is like killing a baby. So we wait. Our Metodo Classic, which is poured for you, is 100% Pinot Noir, and it's a brut. And the brut goes from 0 to 12 grams per liter. And it's pink. It's a rosé because a rosé is a natural and easy result of Pinot Nero. Our Pinot Nero, in this case, after pressing, underwent a maceration on the pomace to be able to extract the color from it. But while, according to our excellent Quattro Calici writers, maceration is good to make blush wines. We do things differently. We press, but we keep everything in the press. We don't drain the grapes. We keep it in the press for up to 5 hours until it hasn't taken on the color that we feel is adequate for our intended goal. So when Pinot Base, which is used as a base wine for making spumante, is much darker than this. But like in this case, 48 months on the yeast, on the lees, and 2 fermentations cause the color to become paler and paler. So the wine becomes much lighter in color, and from my point of view, very enjoyable also to the eyesight. To the eye. And that's a Sanzanè, again, 100% Pinot Nero. I think the bead is elegant. I think you'll agree with me. They are clearly different aromas from Pinot, and there are notes that are reminiscent of flowers with a minor proportion of spice, hints of minerality, which I tend to like a lot in these wines. Pinot has an ability to last longer over time, and so that's the extra, it's the plus of our bubbles. Our Metodo Classicos can last much longer. We're now tasting a 48-month wine. We're going to disgorge the same vintage later. We always put aside a few bottles to see how long it can last. In the Oltrepo, you generally can taste Metodo Classicos with over 100 months on the lees. They are problem-free virtually. Of course, the complexities will be different from the fresh wines, from those of the fresh wines.
Ecco, in bocca la nota, ovviamente qui sentiamo molto di più la bolla.
On the palate, you can detect the bubbles much better.
Non è una bolla grossolana, esplosiva.
Bubbles are not explosive. They're not large and coarse. It's not disturbing to the palate. The notes I can still detect are the smooth, very honey-like notes. The acidity is pronounced, but so high that it becomes fastidious, and so that is encouraging you to take a sip. So I'd like to take another glass. Of course, I'm partisan, but I see a few other people getting a second glass of the same. Our Pinot Nero is therefore a wine that has an aging potential and a capacity to resist time that is remarkable. Today we are running experiments, as I told you, to test these wines and test them at least 10 years on the lees, and there are many of us doing the same, and the results are truly interesting. So maybe next year I'm going to invite to taste something a bit special. We're now tasting 2013, which is still on the lees, at least in part, and apparently it's very satisfactory, very interesting. Of course, the sensations will change. They're almost, the sensations now are almost brackish, and they are typical of Pinot Noir that is left for very long on the lees. This Pinot Noir is very rounded to the palate, although it's a dosage zero, or zero dosage. And all the roundness, all the smoothness comes from the manoproteins that were released by the yeasts during the resting time that the wine spent on the lees. Okay, forget about the wines. We're going to address the reds. This is another area of Pavese, a smaller area. On the steep hills around Stradella, the valleys are narrow, steep, and very special because these are the valleys where you make the base wines for Buttafuoco, based on Croatina and Barbera. Two fundamental varietals to make our Buttafuoco. Not the only ones, I have to say, but the two great varieties that together will help us produce a red of great body, longevity, structure, and drinkability. Okay, let's take a closer look. This is Croatina. Croatina is the queen varietal of this area of the Oltrepo. It's an indigenous grape variety. It is also found in many other areas, including in the area of where you make Amarone, and it goes into the Amarone. The It's rich in tannins and the skin is very thick. We're discussing this just after Pinot because it's at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to grapes compared to Pinot Nero, because Pinot Nero has a very thin skin that will release to color, while Croatina that requires a lot of time to completely reach maturity of polyphenols and tannins, but it has a lot of tannin and color to give.
Data da quest'uva sarà sempre notevole.
And because it takes so long and you have to reach maturity, the alcohol potential of these grapes will be very high. Another essential element in the making of traditional Buttafuoco wine. Well, it's important to know that Buttafuoco is not a blend of wine, so we don't vinify the grapes separately, but it's a grape blend. So it's a mix of grapes. In the cruise, you have different vines in the same vineyard, so the mix is ready for use. Because I wanted you to taste everything at the same time and see the differences as we speak, just after this bottle will be served at the two other cruises so that you can also follow with your nose what I'm telling you. So after Croatia, here is Barbera. Now we all know what Barbera is like. Again, the cluster is very tight, with elongated berries, while the Croatina berries are totally round and the skin here is much thinner. Barbera everywhere in Italy is characterized by one characteristic: acidity. Acidity is the basic quality of Barbera. The acidity provided by Barbera provides the backbone of our wine. So Croatina is the muscles, that is tannin. Now, Barbera provides the skeleton, the structure that will keep the wine lively, drinkable, and manageable for a long time. And then we'll be discussing the two indigenous grape varieties that are unique in our area and that give us a possibility to make Buttafuoco. This is the Ughetta of Canneto. Ughetta is a varietal that is genetically some type of Polina, and it was first described in 1825 by Davis in the first national ampelography ever in Italy as Ughetta of Solenga. Solenga is one of the valleys of Canneto Pavese, the village where we have our wines, and it's a grape variety that has peculiar characteristics. First of all, it's one of the two grape varieties alongside Syrah that imparts a sensation of peppercorns, because in its skin it produces rotundone, which is an aromatic precursor exactly the same as in pepper, and it produces 30 times the necessary amount that our body, our organism to detect it, so the minimum detectable threshold. So a minimum amount is necessary, sufficient to make a signature blend that is typical of our area. And then Uva Rara. Uva Rara because it is loose. The clusters are not tight, as we've seen in the previous varietals. You see there's of room in between. So this is the grape variety that imparts the fruit sensations, the fruit that will have the test of time. 4 different grapes. Why 4 different grapes? Why?
tempi, maturazioni diverse.
Dealing with, why deal with 4 different ripening cycles, 4 different grape treatments? As I said before, this is a place where peasants lived in the past, and the wine wasn't a hedonic product the way it is to us today. Wine was a surplus of calories that was supplementing their diets. So it was necessary and fundamental to be able to bring home some grapes to have extra calories. Having different grapes that would ripen at different times, we're having a plan A and plan B. Now, harvesting the grape today is easier than in the past, when people had to manually pick every single bunch at home and shred it with their feet. Now, imagine, okay, so if it's raining and one grape variety is rotting and I can't go to the vineyard to pick it, I still have Croatina that, because of its thicker skin, it can last longer and I can harvest it later. In those areas where everything was ripening at the same time, so much outness, but
ecco che si faceva un
of divine inspiration, people were making wines that could age very well. Tannin, high acidity, and alcohol were making for a wine that could resist the test of time, resist oxidization, and a wine that was stored in oak, because that was the only way to preserve it, and it was during important occasions, a birthday, the birth of a child, Christmas Day, and that was people would eat meat, which was not on the table every other day. So it had to be a full-bodied and structure-rich wine that would go very well with meat dishes. A couple more words on the buttafuoco. Buttafuoco, Broni, Stradella, Canneto, where we are, Milano, Castana, Pietra de Giorgi, and Cigagnola. This is the area of Buttafuoco DOC. Can only be made in these 7 municipalities I have named. But actually, this area was already an enlargement compared to the traditional area of Buttafuoco. So a number of people who were the reign decided to, so he defined himself, and decided that they wanted to make it that was much more in line with the traditional and historical approach, choose a smaller area, and they gathered an association called the Club of the Historical Buttafuoco. It was started by 10 then young producers in 1996, including my father, who was then, and their goal was to better control vineyard management with the use of external auditors that would monitor the management of the vineyards, and a panel that would decide whether the wine could be bottled in the club's bottles with the ship, the sailing ship brand. Although this is a small area, 10 kilometers in length, it comprises 3 different soils, gravel, sandstone, and clay. Gravel will accumulate a lot of heat during the day and it will lose temperature at night, imparting less warmth to the plants, and so the grapes remain fresh, and also it imparts a lot of minerality. Sandstone will bring a lot of salt and spice. Clay will provide lots of tannins and alcohol, and more intense taste. Wines will be readier for drinking earlier, these ones later. But they all age well. The 3 wines that you're tasting now all come from the gravel soils.
Giusto per intenderci, oggi siamo in un
Just to clarify this, there are a few more people making the Buttafuoco. These are producers of the club of the historical Buttafuoco, and each of us with productions that can vary from 5,000 to 6,000 bottles to who only make 500. We all want to produce a top-level, top-notch Buttafuoco. And most importantly, show, display their cruise in the bottle. So the unique value of each of these cruise in an area that is already so diverse.
Come vedete, queste zone, come vi dicevo prima,
as you see, these areas are very steep. The gradient is high. Here, for instance, is one of our cruise. This is Vigna Solenga. Vigna Solenga, which is on this slope,
tutti I vitigni di cui abbiamo detto prima.
Includes all vines from all 4 varietals I have described before. They were planted based on the temperature gradient from the top to the bottom of the hill. There's a temperature difference of 5 to 6 degrees all year round, which causes the ripening time to be aligned for all the varietals so that you can harvest Barbera at the same time as Croatino. This is the other area. On the other side, this is the Sacca del Monte vineyard. We're here at the top. You see that the rows are going downwards. Here, anyway, here you see something else that is very interesting. You see that there are where the vineyards are everywhere. Here, no, and they've never been because this is facing north. In our part of the country, north-facing vineyards are a no-no because the grape varietals we're using would not allow that. So we leave grass in our vineyards. And that also gives an opportunity to the soils to rejuvenate constantly and improve constantly. We've made Buttafuoco for a long time in my family. This is the deed of purchase of a Vigna Solenga that I was showing to you. It's because we were under Napoleon, the rule of Napoleon, and it dates back to 1814. So from then on, we've always made wines and in that area. And I mentioned the Ughetta di Solenga. Okay. So it says a vineyard named Solenga. So we've always made that wine. This is a bottle of 1961. The very first labels we used because we were bottling our wines back then. So back to the basis, however, back to the glass. This is the hunter, il cacciatore. Il cacciatore is the first wine. How do you like it? I hope you have detected the fruit. There's a lot of cherry. Cherries are a very strong descriptor that invariably applies to Croatina. And soon after that, the spice. I told you the spice comes from the Ughetta. And that brings to the nose balsamic aromas, sensations that... But although this is a wine that has 14% ABV with 1 year in oak, it makes this wine sweet and makes us want to drink more of it. On the palate, it is juicy, as usual, and fleshy. Here I can detect the fruit quite easily, the cherries, and that on the palate and also around my tongue. Then this note that will continue, the acidic note that will continue being felt and cleanse my palate. Tannin is certainly present, and I can feel it on the sides of the mouth. Now, bear in mind that I grew up with these wines, on these wines. So I'm biased, but this is not an excessive tannin. Quite the contrary. I want more of this wine, despite the structure that is pretty evident, I think. Now, obviously, I'm speaking here, and I imagine that our friends of Toronto maybe might have a few questions, but that is also holds true about the people here in person. So feel free to ask questions or make remarks. And then we have two crews. The first here is the Solenga. The Solenga is characterized by having the fact of containing a bit more Barbera than the rest. So proportion of Barbera, and between the two crews, it's the one that contains slightly less alcohol and slightly more acidity. So this comes from grapes that were grown on gravel. This particular vineyard is only gravel. You have ethereal notes on the nose, accompanied once again by some spice, hints of spice, and fruit in alcohol. I'm starting to also detect nuances that suggest some aging, like coffee.
In bocca, corpo, struttura.
And in the mouth, you detect the body, the structure. It's very effective, rich in alcohol. In actual truth, this has 15% ABV. So you can to the fruit in alcohol. It's very evident in this, and it also is some saltiness towards the finish. And again, despite the alcohol, despite the tannins, and despite the fact that instead of 2 years in oak and 1 in the bottle, this is a important glass, but it's not one that you have a hard time drinking entirely. So it makes sense to pour another glass. It's not something that you're going to leave on the table. The typical pairings with these wines will be meat stew, game, fat dishes, and full-bodied dishes. But I encourage you to taste it, and I like this very much, with cheese, medium and long-aged cheese, like a Castelmagno or a Grana that has aged long, or if you're lucky enough, you might come across some Bettelmat cheese, and that is very, very enjoyable. And then I like it on its own as well. Also because the note that remains on my palate that is reminiscent of cherries and with all this fruit does not make me want to eat a meal to be able to drink this wine, despite the alcohol content, which is certainly high. This is 2020. I mean, the cacciatore is 2020. That's the entry-level buttafuoco. The youngest buttafuoco and the simplest. The other two were made from grapes harvested in 2017, the same vintage as the Metodo Classico. Just to spend a couple of words about the vintage, 2017 was a year that was very similar to 2022, very dry, warm, not much rainfall. And also in March, we suffered major losses from a big frost, and then was followed by a very dry season. I remember we finished harvesting on the 27th of September, and my father, who will turn 74 in January, said we finished harvesting so early in the whole history of the winery. And just to make things clear, this year we ended on the 22nd of September. So, I mean, people who live in the countryside and work in a natural setting will see firsthand the effects of climate change. Continue. The other wine is called Sacca del Prete. Sacca del Prete is a vineyard that's very dear to me, because while the Vigna Solenga has been our family forever, bear in mind that in families like the name of our wines, Il Cavaliere, Il Cacciatore. Il Cacciatore is dedicated to my father, whose the Cavaliere was my grandfather. And to us in the family, the names of the vineyards are, something constant. And the relationship with the vineyard, if you're a farming family, is the same relationship that you have with a cousin. To us, our vineyards are aunts, uncles, and cousins. So Vigna Solengo certainly is the dean of them all. The Sacca del Prete is the last vineyard that my grandfather planted. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to finish the planting and therefore see the crop. It was planted in 1996, and my grandfather died in 1997. At the same time as the Buttafuoco project was started. We started making Buttafuoco originally in the vineyard, which had been replanted for the last time by my great-grandfather in the 1960s. So we knew that sooner or later we would have to replant it, also because the sustainability from a and also environmental perspective was no longer there. So 1.5 hectares that you had to the weeds with manual implements. And also the vines had been replanted in the empty spots almost haphazardly, and so we knew at some point we'd have to replant it entirely. So we planted the Vigna Sacca del Prete. So after 10 years of its planting, we made the first Buttafuoco from the Vigna Sacca del Prete in 2007, and we replanted Vigna Solenga. That again produced a Buttafuoco Storico for the first time again in 2015. We could have made it in 2014, but I think you remember what kind of vintage that was. So what are the main differences? I think they're very easily detectable. This is darker, perhaps more closed as a wine. A bit deeper, but then especially to the palate, it again releases its cherries, although more austere than the other wine.
però anche lui con una
but once again with
ben risolta.
a
Siamo arrivati
well-balanced tannin content.
morbido,
The wine is
rotondo,
smooth, sufficient round,
completamente privo di zuccheri.
although it is completely
Le glicerine naturali, grandi alcolicità, questo vino
fermented, so no more sugars. And the glycerin in wines, and this wine is close to 16% ABV, will give a complexity, fill the mouth. In this case, again, luckily enough, the wine does not feel heavy, does not feel cumbersome. It's not monolithical, if I can use that word, he's saying.
E vi invito a
I encourage you to smell all the glasses because the wines keep changing.
sensazioni differenti.
And so you will get different sensations in the
Per esempio,
process.
io comincio a sentire
Like here, for instance, I am
comincio a sentire un pochino
feeling some tobacco in the wine. I can smell
che vanno verso il cuoio.
notes that are more leathery.
E con questo direi che abbiamo fatto una carrellata
That closes our overview of the productions of the area.
tempi, modi,
The
possibilità.
timing, the methods, the options, and the drinkability of the final product. And then, obviously, now it's your turn to ask questions and remarks. Of course, I could be 6 hours telling you about our wines, but would like to hear you if you have any questions or remarks. You think if you agree with me or
Ecco, giusto.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very informative. Just to on your concept on the historic of Vina Solenka 2016, that the concept of inviting the glass, that's one glass after the other. I just want to ask your perception on the price of the wine. Here it says the price is about, well, it's $88 a bottle, which is about 60 to 65 euro a retail price for consumer. Does that seem reasonable to you? Provided that if this would be at a restaurant, you multiply it by at least 2.5 to 3 times. Does that seem reasonable?
serve la traduzione?
Me la traduci per favore, perché
Sì.
mi sono perso a metà.
Allora dice che il prezzo, se ritiene che il prezzo sia ragionevole considerando che il prezzo esposto loro è di circa 65 euro e che verrà triplicato nel ristorante.
Cioè per lui va bene il prezzo? No, non ho capito.
No, non che sia tanto, però, se ho capito bene. Non lo dice esplicitamente, ma direi.
In Italia o là? Perché il problema è questo.
So, I think you're talking about the retail price
Sapete benissimo che
on your side of the ocean. You know that the FIO has its own policies concerning transportation and pricing.
tenete presente che per esempio
Now, bearing in mind that we're talking about wines and we're talking about the two crews, where one is producing at most
73 bottiglie
3,870 bottles and the other one at most 1,912. So that's the maximum production. So necessarily it's very unique, it's very special, a niche product. Now, this being said, the role of taxes, transportation and all the rest, unfortunately, I can't do anything about it. It's nothing I can have a say in.
Questa qua è la mia importatrice.
So speaking about the price in Canada
Eccola là,
versus in Italy,
È partita lei, sì.
For this, the pricing point, we've done a bare markup to try to introduce him more into the. Over the last 2 years, we found that his price has gone up, obviously due to COVID, with the logistics problems that COVID has created. We've had problems getting his wine here, but we're hoping that now that everything is calming down logistically, as you may or may not know, El Spio's had four increases this year, 2 in September alone. So you're going to see, unfortunately, increases in prices all over across the board. Sir.
Sì.
The El Spio rounds out. They round up, and they do that because when the wine arrives, it might be a slightly different price point, so they're preparing themselves.
Yeah, wait, can I pass you the mic? Because they can't hear you in Italy.
Si è ribadito il concetto, in pratica diceva che è stato proprio il monopolio
The only thing I
canadese ad
was wondering
aumentare.
is the rosé that we had here, it distinguishes that it has a specific rosé color. Our rosé was pretty much a white wine color. I was curious about whether that was meant to be. And I also was curious about how they determined to get to that sort of obtuse flavor that came with that wine.
Allora dice che si è parlato del colore del rosé, però dice che quello che hanno in degustazione ha un colore piuttosto tendente al bianco, per cui dice non mi rendo conto se è un qualcosa di intenzionale oppure no.
Sì, se lui...
E poi diceva anche il bouquet che lei ha chiamato un po' ottuso di questo vino, anche lui intenzionale o no?
Un po' chiuso?
Lei l'ha chiamato
Ma parlando sempre del rosa?
Still referring to the rosé
Allora, sul
when you talk about the bouquet.
il nostro discorso è molto semplice.
When it comes to color, what we say is very simple. You have a white side by side with the rosé, and you can immediately tell one is pink and the other is not. And then the color, as we said at the very beginning, as it leaves the press, it's very rich in color, but then it loses a lot of color during fermentation.
Voi se venite una volta in...
And if you visit once.
Ma non so.
Sorry, they are discussing in the room.
Non lo so. Io ho spedito il rosa, poi...
Giulio?
When I shipped it, it was pink.
È arrivato il bianco lì o il rosa?
So what did you receive? Wine, the pink wine?
Giulio, I believe it's the white.
Ah, boh. Allora ho capito.
Oh, then I understand why. So what you tasted in Canada, evidently was not the rosé. It must evidently be. There must have been some problem with the ship. What you tasted, what you've got in the glass, is the white version. It's our extra 60 months on the lease, dosage zero.
It's the Blanc de Blanc.
Yeah, Blanc de Noir. Sì. Il Blanc de Noir, 600%.
It's a Blanc de Noir, 100% Pinot Nero again, dosage zero. Probably it was the wine that we shipped and not the rosé. But also that one spent 60 months on the lees, dosage zero, the nose of that wine. Well, after 60 months, unlike this one, spent 48 months on the lees. In your case, the Noir has a much more complex nose and it involves much more mineral notes. It's not about the fruit, it's more about complexity and structure than fruit.
Invece qua mi era stato chiesto qualcosa sul
I think there was a question here about the soil of the Sacca del Prete. Unlike the soil of the Solenga in the Sacca del Prete, it's more of a soil. The former case, you have 100% gravel in this area. You have 70% gravel, but there's also a vein of stone and also clay to a minor proportion that make a difference. And also in terms of layout, although both vineyards are facing south, and they are on two hills, two nearby hills, the very structure of the soils makes them different. While the Solenga is following a pattern from top to bottom, so it's a slope. La Sacca, which means bag, is made of one concave and one convex stretch, where in the concave stretch you have some water that remains, while in the convex part it will just go away. And so you get temperature differences pretty easily throughout the year. I hope that answers your question. Any other question before we close? I'm sorry about the Metodo Classico. You received a different than the one we were tasting here.
Sorry, can you hear me there in Italy?
Yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about Croatina. Tried to do a little bit of research about it. Is there a relation to Nebbiolo? And if stylistically there's room for 100% Croatina, is there something that you do that is something like that? There's more higher percentage of Croatina?
We do make wine that contain 100% Croatina, but Croatina is not similar to Nebbiolo. There are a few key differences that differentiate it from Nebbiolo. Croatina, as we were saying initially, has a very thick skin, and it requires a lot of ripening. Its tannins are very aggressive, and it almost has 4 pips in the berries, and hardly ever do they reach a full maturity. So it is pressed very often with green pips, green seeds, and because it requires a long maturation, it loses acidity. So in the maturation of Croatina, acidity starts dropping when you reach full polyphenol maturity, which doesn't mean that you can make a great long-lived Croatina, but often of Barbera, some proportion of Barbera will give it, a punch in terms of drinkability, freshness, and enjoyability that is maintained over time. So the wine remains drinkable longer. It's possible to make a wine based on 100% Croatina, but usually these wines are often exposed to a lot of reduction because of the very aggressive tannins, which, if they're not managed correctly, can be difficult to handle. So we've experimented with a few. On pressure wines with a maximum of 3 to 4 years of aging, 3 to 4 years of aging, it can yield very satisfactory results.
Qualcos'altro?
More questions?
No one?
Okay, good.
Sì, allora, vabbè, i nostri vini, vabbè, abbiamo avuto la fortuna che i nostri vini
Just before I come to a close, our wines, I'll say that our wines very appreciated by all the Italian guides.
lasci mandare l'ultima slide.
And if I can show the very last, or perhaps the one before the last of my slides, I think we can say
Abbiamo vinto Vite,
that we were rewarded by Vite, the various AIS, the Italian Psalm Association's awards.
eccetera, eccetera, e poi sono
So,
arrivati
and then also
adesso
we were
tre bicchieri.
recognized for the tre bicchieri for our cacciatore, which is the
Siamo molto contenti
younger
di
brother.
poter dire che oramai da
But we're very happy to be able to say that
almeno 5-6
for at
anni a
least
questa
5
parte
to 6
riusciamo a
years,
piazzarci sempre
we've always managed to be ranked among
vini delle piazze.
the top wines in prominent wine guides. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us.
Bianco. Due foto?